When Yeon-woo and Isuri entered the room, they saw a picture of a soldier telling So-yeon that she could not go with them. The man held So-yeon to keep her from going out the door, and said that she could not leave because it was dangerous. Yeon-woo looked at So-young, so many emotions raging in him, but his face was completely disinterested. So-yeon screamed and pleaded with the soldier, adding that she could not sit idly by while her friends were in danger. Suddenly, Isuri interrupted their conversation. She ironically asked what So-yeon could do to help them and be useful. Her face was not just stony, it expressed dissatisfaction. The girl continued that anyone would die if they encountered a zombie monster. She asked what So-young could do about it. The girl replied that she would have done anything, but Isuri said that this was not true and that her classmate would only be in the way. She added that she had repeatedly said that it was dangerous even in this room, but So-yeon simply did not want to accept or understand it. Isuri added that it was possible that Hanmi would bring the virus with him, and that there were 10 days before Seoul opened. She asked So-yeon if she could live through those 10 days and survive. The military officer suddenly supported Isuri, adding that no one should have left the room for the sake of everyone's safety. So-yeon looked at the soldier in shock. She knew inside that she was powerless, but she wanted to save her friend so badly. She did not want her to regret her inaction. The soldier said that they could do nothing if a virus appeared in the room, so the man asked the teenagers to protect him in their absence. Finally, the soldier spoke to the homeless man. He asked the man to take care of these children. Yeon-woo thought about what So-young had just said and looked down. Suddenly, the phrase that the girl couldn't sit idly by when her friends were in danger came to mind. He walked past the girl and thought about who he and Kim Joo-bin were to her then. Suddenly, the boy raised his head and looked at his classmates. He was again filled with anger and hatred. Then, Kang-min was about to say something. Suddenly, Isuri interrupted him rudely and told him to give her a chance to think. The girl was a spark. She began to command that everyone had to listen to her first. All the other teenagers looked at Isuri and for some reason listened attentively, as if she were in charge. She looked at Kang-min and told him that his classmates had something to do now and that it was important to remember it. Meanwhile, another homeless man named Hwang was approached by another homeless man who was in the group of newcomers. Suddenly, everyone started to panic and yell. He told Hwang to run quickly after him. When the homeless man came running, he saw that there was a fight between two other homeless people down there. A man with blonde hair was holding a broken bottle and threatening another man with it. Then Hwang ran up to the man to calm him down and take the bottle away from him. Meanwhile, Isuri was telling something about her experience when she was able to prevent the virus but not kill it completely. Meanwhile, Hwang suddenly became very sick. His eyes grew bigger and his pupils constricted. It turned out that a homeless man with white hair had stabbed him in the stomach with a broken bottle. Blood immediately poured out of his body. Everyone else just laughed and stood by and watched as they mutilated poor Hwang. They wanted to kill him. Suddenly, someone called Hwang Dong-chul's name. The man turned toward the sound. He was a healthy man with broad shoulders and a white t-shirt with a cap. He said that Hwang had to solve the problem peacefully. The homeless man looked at the man directly in the eye and called him a bastard. After these words, all the other homeless people started beating Hwang and calling him names. The man fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Isuri said that the only ones who ruined all the plans in the end were the people. Ham Seong-yu interrupted the conversation. He asked why they should have been careful with other people, judging by Isuri's speech, and then added that it was all nonsense. The girl reacted to the boy's words with defiance and indignation. Suddenly, So-yeon turned to her classmate and asked her why she was telling them all of a sudden. It looked like something was about to happen, and it made So-yeon scared. Suddenly, Isuri said that a lot of infected people had just arrived. So-yeon's face changed dramatically, and she became frightened. Isuri told them not to ask how she knew this information. She added that even in this place there were infected people, and then they could have been killed. Ham Song-yu and the others were very indignant at what they heard. They told the girl to stop fooling around and stop mocking them. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted. Someone came into the room and called out to the teenagers. They were homeless. A fat, tall man in a white t-shirt and cap called the teenagers rats and told them to come to him. Something terrible was brewing. Meanwhile, the news was talking about a public gathering for the realization of justice, which held a press conference again. They claimed that the government had been covering up the mutated virus incident in Seoul. At this conference, Shim Guyon, as vice president of the CCOJAR, provided information on the status of military preparations to combat the virus in connection with the emergence of the non-mutated virus. According to the document, using the word cell, which likely referred to a mutated virus, infected people could have been at risk of being killed by acts of murder. The government took measures to contain the spread of the virus, as they were classified from Class A to Class D. Meanwhile, the authorities have yet to comment on the matter. Meanwhile, the city was in chaos. 2 people were running fast somewhere. They were holding burning torches to protect themselves from monsters, and in such a situation, perhaps, from the army. It turned out to be Kang Ji-hoon and a soldier. They were hiding behind the wall of the building from the army in front of them. There were a lot of soldiers on the bypass. They had to somehow get through them to find Hanmi and the girls. Kang Ji-hoon asked what the military was burning and hypothesized that it was infected people. The man said that it seemed to be true. They ran on, and Kang Ji-hoon said that they might as well have turned around and run home. It turned out that the torch was in the possession of a soldier. The team ran between buildings and alleys to somehow get around the army. The man told the boy that they had to be careful because the virus could spread. Kang Ji-hoon looked at the soldier, and suddenly memories of the man began to surface in his mind. He recalled how the soldier said at the gas station that he wanted to help Kang Ji-hoon find his friends. Suddenly, the starosta addressed the man as Mr. They all called him that usually. Kang Ji-hoon wanted to ask him something. Suddenly, the soldier was outraged and told them to stop calling him that, and that in fact, there was no such difference between them as to make him a Mr. Then the soldier said that his name was Ha-jiman, but they could have just called him Jiman Hyun. Then Kang Ji-hoon said it was strange to call him Hyun, and then he decided to make a joke about his name, Ha-jiman. The man replied that the boy's name was no better. Then Kang Ji-hoon decided to finish his thought and said that he didn't expect Hyun to really help him in his search for Hong-mi. He added that he was a little surprised. The soldier was a little indignant at Ji-hoon's distrust and asked him who he thought he was. After all, Hyun had promised to help. The man added that he was also the only one who was surprised. Kang Ji-hoon didn't understand why, so Jiman Hyun said that he didn't expect the headman to come out and save Hong-mi because he was so close to her. He added that usually kids his age didn't do such things, so Jiman Hyun was very curious about who she was to him. At this question, Kang Ji-hoon was a little flustered. He hadn't expected such frankness, and he had kept his amorous affairs under wraps. He started to defend himself and attacked Hyun that it was a stupid question. Suddenly, the man interrupted him and told him to wait. There was a large number of monsters in front of them. The whole road was dotted with them, so they would not have been able to pass safely. Jiman Hyun said that there were too many monsters ahead of them, so they had to get around them somehow. The man turned around to say something to Kang Ji-hoon in closing. But the guy was already holding a lighted Molotov cocktail and was ready to defend himself. Suddenly we heard an explosion and the screams of zombie monsters, and from the height of the buildings a large fire was visible. There was a mini-market near them. The road to it was clear. A soldier came in and said it was good that there was a mini-market. That way they could get some water. He added that the children might not have anything to drink. Kang Ji-hoon was standing by the door keeping watch. He asked Hyun if Hong-mi was okay. The soldier replied that he was supposed to be. Then he asked if the girl had called the headman. Suddenly, Kang Ji-hoon returned to the intimate topic himself. He repeated the military officer's question about who Hong-mi was to him. He began to tell me that when they were in high school, the guy was a bully. You could really see it in him. Kang Ji-hoon began to reminisce and talk about his dark past and the not-so-good company he was in back then. There were 5 guys. One of them was on a blue motorcycle. One of the company members said he thought Kang Ji-hoon was dropping out of school. The headman laughed and called him a jerk. He told me that he hated school then and felt empty every day. It was during that period that he became close to Lee Hong-mi. The guy was standing at a traffic light, waiting for the light to turn green. Lee Hong-mi noticed him then and asked if Kang Ji-hoon also lived nearby. The girl was standing with her mother. Hong-mi's mom asked who Kang Ji-hoon was. She replied that he was a classmate of hers. Then Hong-mi started telling her mom that Kang Ji-hoon was good at sports and added that he was very cool at the last festival. Kang Ji-hoon blushed. Hong-mi's mom was immediately interested in this guy. She asked Kang Ji-hoon to be her friend, adding that he was very handsome. Lee Hong-mi was immediately nervous when she heard this. She didn't expect her mother to set her up like that, but Kang Ji-hoon said that he would certainly be her friend. He had never spoken to Hong-mi before. The girl said goodbye and left. Since then, she has always talked to Kang Ji-hoon at school, every day. He started to feel really happy then. His life made sense again, and being at school seemed less terrible. The graduation ceremony came. Parents congratulated their children who did well in school and brought flowers. Kang Ji-hoon stood propped up against the wall in the hall and looked at his phone. Suddenly, he heard someone talking to him. The person said that they had heard that Kang Ji-hoon's parents could not make it, and that he must have been very sad about it. It turned out to be Lee Hong-mi's mother. She was smiling at Kang Ji-hoon and holding flowers. The woman sincerely wanted to support the boy so that he would not be sad. The woman said she was sure that his parents would have been happy to come and gave Kang Ji-hoon flowers, saying it was a gift for him. She congratulated the boy on his graduation. His face changed dramatically with surprise. Lee Hong-mi's parents asked to take a picture together. Hunmi and Kang Ji-hoon stood next to each other, with the girl's parents on their sides. Kang Ji-hoon told the soldier that her parents were very nice people and treated bad guys like him well. The boy added that he could only hope that happiness would not go away. The soldier listened carefully to the boy. He realized that it was important to him because it was probably the first time Kang Ji-hoon had ever spoken to someone at all. The man approached the boy and put his hand on his shoulder as a sign of support. He promised that Lee Hong-mi was fine. The team ran off. It was time to go in search of Kang Ji-hoon's friend. Suddenly, they heard that they had been found. The team put their hands up. The army said they had found those responsible for the arson. The guys were in danger because the military pointed their guns at them with fire. Meanwhile, in the shelter, the teenagers kept talking to homeless people, who apparently did not want to be friends with the children. Isuri told the homeless people that 2 of their friends had gone to the shelter to bring them supplies. The man with white hair who had injured Hwang with a broken bottle asked what his boss was doing and told them to just kill the teenagers. A fat man with a cap yelled at him and said that they had no food supplies. Then the boss threatened the children that if they lied to him, he would kill them all. Isuri asked with a calm face and rather claimed that the man was acting like this because she was constantly cheating him. And then she said that they would give them half of their supplies if the homeless people did not touch the children. She spoke so confidently as if the homeless were supposed to be afraid of her and obey her orders. Then the homeless threw the children into a room behind a glass door. They said that their friends should have hurried, because if there is no food on their table by evening, they will do to the children what they did to him. The man in the cap pointed to the floor. Hwang was lying there. He was almost unconscious and barely breathing. The boss would come out and tell the homeless man in the hat and red jacket to keep an eye on the teenagers. The children quickly ran to their friend Hwang. The man was covered in blood. He had been beaten badly by those bastards. Kang Min leaned over to the homeless man. Hwang was alive and barely breathing. The guy said he thought the homeless man was a former boxer. That's what he told them. Ham Seong-yu shouted and was indignant that he didn't know what they were supposed to do now, because no one was supposed to bring any supplies. He yelled at Isuri, asking why she had told the men. Ham Seong-yu added that they would die at this rate. Isuri responded by asking him if he had any other ideas. Then Jeon-woo interjected himself into the conversation. The guy said that, in fact, it would be better if the infected people just started showing symptoms. Yeon-woo turned to Isuri and said that those who were infected would have started showing symptoms even before Kang Ji-hoon and Ji Man-hyun returned. Meanwhile, the homeless people were sitting in another room, laughing at the teenagers. Suddenly, a friend of the homeless man wearing military pants started coughing and shaking. His friend asked him if he was okay because he noticed his friend's strange condition. He looked at the man and asked if he was feeling well. Suddenly, the infected man started vomiting on the floor. He was shaking all over. Suddenly, the friend who was lying on the bed saw this, and his eyes widened and his mouth dropped open in surprise. He suddenly realized that his friend was infected and was about to turn into a zombie monster. Meanwhile, the teens came up with a further plan of action. Isuri said that if the mutated virus appeared in the room, everything would go wrong and the homeless would flee the room. She added that they had already encountered the frog egg cell virus. Isuri summarized that they could all have gone through all of this too if they had planned well. She said they were all very lucky because she had always failed all of her tests and exams. Meanwhile, So-yeon was looking at Isuri very closely. The girl noticed this, so she asked her classmate if she had anything to say to her, but So-yeon remained silent. On the contrary, this question, which sounded more like a hit and run, scared the girl a lot. She did not want to have any problems or clashes with her classmates. With a serious face and a little rudeness, Isuri asked So-yeon why she was looking at her like that. She ended by telling her to stop doing it. So-yeon immediately began to apologize, but she was a little nervous. Isuri's mood scared her. Meanwhile, Ham Sung-yu stepped away from everyone to think. He said out loud that he shouldn't have followed his classmates here. He was swearing, and it was clear that he was very sorry. Suddenly, he received a notification on his phone. He read it on a closed screen, and what he read surprised the guy. He did not expect to see it. It was his friend Park Min. He texted Ham Sung-yeon a simple hello on the messenger. The guy's heart started beating rapidly, and cold sweat began to pour down his face. He did not reply to his friend, and simply sent Park Min away out loud. Ham Seong-yu's behavior was quite strange, because they had agreed together to go to the point that the boy knew about and escape. Ham Seong-yu was supposed to be with his friend in a shelter, Kang Ming said that the virus with a new incubation period had already begun to spread, and no one knew what was coming. The guy continued that they were now in the basement dining room. They were not able to escape, but the teenagers could still use fire. He pointed to a gas stove standing nearby. He added that, fortunately, Ham Seong-yu had a lighter. In a pinch, he could have just burned everyone. Kang Min was saying that if the virus started to spread, they would have to figure out how to start a fire. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo was listening and found a gas stove. He looked at it carefully and made some conclusions. Jeon-woo suddenly said that lighting the gas stove was no problem. Everyone else turned to him. He added that the problem was that they all should have been more careful, because the infected people caught fire very quickly, so the fire spread very quickly. Finally, Yeon-woo added that they were all in the basement now, and it would have been more logical to set fire to them from above. Then, Ham Sung-yu asked with irony and mockery what the boy proposed to do. Suddenly the boy started shouting and getting aggressive. He asked Yeon-woo why he was still here with them and called his classmate a little piece of shit. He added that in addition to the homeless, they also had the problem of Yeon-woo being infected. Kang Min stood up for his classmate and told him not to be an idiot. After all, they shouldn't all be suspicious of each other and quarreling. But the classmate responded by saying that he was just saying what he thought, and unlike Kang Min, he was not in debt to Yeon-woo. Then Jeon-woo himself intervened and told them not to worry, because he would leave before they knew whether the boy was infected or not. He turned to Isuri and asked if she still wanted to go with him. The girl did not understand his actions, so she just remained silent for the time being. Then Yeon-woo said he should have left when she said before they all got stuck here. Then he said he was so stupid to try to save her after they left him. So-yeon looked down. She felt ashamed again because she thought he was talking about her. After this speech, he turned to Ham Seong-yu and suggested that his classmate just shut his mouth. He looked him straight in the eye. In response, he heard Ham Sung-yu curse him and asked if Yeon-woo was hoping that after talking to him a few times, they would become friends. After that, he asked what kind of bullshit Yeon-woo had just said. Jeon-woo looked him straight in the eye without any fear. On the contrary, he was so angry at him for everything he had done to him. The guy said he had just ordered Ham Seong-yun to shut his mouth. Suddenly, Kang Min intervened in the fight. He tried to calm them down and told them that now was not the time to start a fight. Kang Min turned to Yeon-woo and said that he understood why the boy despised them all, but there was no time to work things out. Yeon-woo looked at Kang Min. It was unclear what he was thinking at all. His classmate continued that they had no choice but to help each other now. Suddenly, Isuri echoed Kang Min's words, adding that they should have stopped fighting every time. The girl shouted that they should have fed themselves for something, but she was unable to finish. Kang Min interrupted her and asked her to let him speak. He apologized and politely asked that everyone listen to him. The guy said that this thought had not left him from the very beginning, even when they were on the cable car. He was thinking about how this virus appeared and what it was. Kang Ming said it was a virus that kept growing until the host died, and the cell division didn't stop. So to summarize, the guy said he settled on the next option. He looked at his classmates with his crazy eyes and said that the virus would be very similar to cancer cells. Kang Min quickly began to explain before everyone had time to laugh at his hypothesis. He said he had tested all the types of cancer cells they knew, and they were similar to each other. Isuri was skeptical of her classmate's speech. She ironically asked if Kang Min wanted to burn the zombie monsters with radiation. He understood the joke, but answered seriously. He asked if teenagers had ever heard of high-frequency heat treatment. The guy started talking about it, because he realized that this was probably the first time they had all heard of this phenomenon. He said that it was one of the ways of treatment to kill cancer cells with heat. They are usually heated up to 40 degrees. Isuri asked if Kang Min meant that they should all pay attention to the temperature. He smiled because he was glad that his classmates understood his point. Isuri started thinking and developing Kang Min's idea. She wondered out loud if they could use water for such a thing. The girl added that water would not cause fire and they would not all burn, and it could easily destroy the virus. So-yeon looked at her carefully. Isuri went on to say that if they wanted to take control of the situation, they could indeed try using water with different temperatures. So-yeon suddenly thought about how Isuri looked like a cold bookworm at school. She sat at her desk all the time reading. She didn't talk to anyone and had no friends. But in this situation, Isuri just shone. Kang Min started to rejoice and say that they were all finally on the same side. He gave Isura a high five, and the girl told him to go and die. Meanwhile, So-yeon continued to think about Isuri. The girl's confidence made So-yeon believe them and lean on her, until she realized that she was helpless. Suddenly, everyone screamed at the strange sound they heard outside the door of the room they were in. They turned around and saw two homeless men who were supposed to be guarding the teenagers. One of them had fallen down, and the other seemed to be lying on a chair. Suddenly, the homeless people above heard it. They thought it was the teenagers trying to escape and starting a riot. Isuri asked Kang Min if it was a scream. She wanted to make sure she wasn't the only one who heard it. The boy confirmed the screams. Kang Min suddenly screamed and asked if it had already started, and the homeless began to turn into zombie monsters again. Yeon-woo reacted quickly and shouted for them to close the door faster, whoever was closer. They had to lock them before the homeless people started coming downstairs. The guy was looking at the company, but So-yeon decided that she had to do it herself. She didn't want to be helpless and had to show that she was bringing some value to the company. The girl suddenly screamed that she was going to run and close the door. But unfortunately, So-yeon was not tall enough to reach the lock, which was on top of the door. So-yeon realized this and turned to Isuri, saying that she was not reaching and needed something like a chair. But Isuri was already holding it in her hands. She was so annoyed. So-yeon couldn't think while being yelled at, so she stood there in a stupor for a few seconds. Then Isuri yelled at her again and told her to get in quickly. So-yeon got up on a chair and started to close the door. The girl was really reacting very strangely to Isuri. Meanwhile, Hwang, a homeless man, was lying unconscious on the floor. No one was responding to him anymore. The teenagers ran around looking for things that could burn. They didn't have enough water to use. Kang Ming, meanwhile, searched through all the drawers in the kitchen to find some cooking utensils. The guy said that it could be tied with napkins, doused in oil, and used as a wick. Meanwhile, Yeon-woo had already made the first wick, following Kang Min's instructions. The boy praised him and told him to continue knitting. Suddenly, Yeon-woo heard strange noises in the room. It made him scared and turned around. He saw Hwang, a homeless man, suddenly start to get up. The teenagers didn't think the man had survived the beating. Yeon-woo approached the man and asked if he was okay. Suddenly, the homeless man looked to the side. Something caught his attention. Hwang did not respond to Yeon-woo's words. The man began to stand up and said that the subversives had to run as fast as possible and get out of the room. Yeon-woo was still offering Hwang his help. Suddenly, he heard strange sounds coming from the door. He looked up and could not believe his eyes. Homeless people came running to the door and started breaking into the teenagers' room. A man in a red jacket shouted to the teenagers that he was infected. White slime began to flow down the stairs, catching up with the homeless. Suddenly, they started banging hard on the glass inside and begging the teenagers to open the door and let them in. It was so funny from the outside. Karma kept coming back. Yeon-woo looked at them and did not know what to do. Time was short, and he didn't want to decide for everyone. Meanwhile, the team of Kang Ji-hoon and Jiman-hyun did not fare any better. The army was heading somewhere. There were no boys among them. The men were holding firearms and giving commands that the road ahead was clear and very quiet. It was even frightening. Suddenly, a zombie monster screamed from above. He stuck to the glass of a building and roared loudly, making himself known. The man said that it was just a one-time goal. He ordered to open fire. Because there was only one zombie monster, only one soldier fired at it. All the others did not even bother to look in that direction. Suddenly, behind the soldier, Jim-hyun could be seen. The man in uniform asked him if the place they were looking for was definitely around here. Suddenly, Kang Ji-hoon was standing next to Jiman-hyun. The boy said he was sure of it because his friends had called him. The girls said they were hiding somewhere in the building of a private bureau. The soldier said they would continue to search the area. He said on the radio that there were 4 schoolgirls who managed to survive and claimed that they were hiding somewhere in one of the buildings. The man said they would rescue them and bring them back. These words did not sit well with Jiman-hyun. He told Kang Ji-hoon that it looked like the men weren't going to take it. Then someone said that the military should be more careful. The man continued that they had found an accumulation of level A virus. And first, they had to burn it. It was just a white slime that was located in the same alleyway of houses. Another soldier said that it would be better to wait a bit. He gave the order that they should have been more careful because it was dangerous. Jihan-hyun became curious about the process and asked the army if it was a level A virus. Then, the man answered positively and reiterated his words. He added that viruses are classified by their size and density. For example, level A. Most of them were larger than a human, and sometimes they could reach sizes of more than 3 meters. Kang Ji-hoon and Jihan-hyun listened attentively to the soldier's speech. Then the military man thought that perhaps the virus at the station was one of them. Jihan-hyun decided to tell the army about how he had seen the infected cats join together and become bigger. The soldiers could not believe what the man was telling them. They had never heard of such cases before. Meanwhile, 2 soldiers entered a room. but they said that unfortunately the girls were not there. They were joined by 2 other men who also said that the girl was not there. Suddenly, the soldier noticed that the door to one of the rooms was already open. He decided to tell his partners about it so that they could inspect the suspicious premises together. But it was Kang Ji-hoon who reacted faster. He ran over and saw that the door was open. He was very motivated and excited to start searching again. He suddenly felt that his Han-mi was about to be found. He knew she was somewhere nearby. The soldier came in and looked around the room. He said that the footprints indicated that there were some people inside, but no survivors were found. Kang Ji-hoon himself carefully examined the room once again to find at least a hint that Han-mi had been here. Suddenly, the guy shouted her name. Then the soldier said that there were also footprints somewhere there. He came out of another exit. The company went out into a passage, and the military officer said that it looked like someone had gone that way after the arson. But, unfortunately, no traces were found. They all kept walking. The man added that someone had definitely passed through this alley. Kang Ji-hoon clearly understood the military's words and decided not to waste a second. Suddenly, the guy broke away and ran down this alley, which was probably where his Han-mi was going. Kang Ji-hoon ran as fast as he could. He was not afraid of anyone or anything. He just wanted to see Han-mi as soon as possible and save her. The military yelled at him that he was an idiot. The guy realized this himself. He knew that he was acting completely rashly. Suddenly, memories came flooding back to him. Kang Ji-hoon remembered when they were at school, and Lee Hong-mi told him that she had learned a very cool English word. Kang Ji-hoon was sitting at his desk, or rather lying on it. In front of him, Han-mi sat and asked if he knew the meaning of the word destiny, to which the boy replied that of course he knew. It was a computer game he was playing. Han-mi looked at Kang Ji-hoon and said that it must have been fate. She added that she liked this kind of thing because it was very romantic. But Kang Ji-hoon was definitely not in the mood. He said that it was all cool, but the girl had to fail. He added that he was very sleepy, so she shouldn't have woken him up. Han-mi looked at the boy with resentment. She was not pleased to hear this. After that, Kang Ji-hoon woke up and stretched loudly. Suddenly, he saw something on his hand. It caught his attention. On his hand was written destiny. It looks like Han-mi wrote it and left, just like Kang Ji-hoon asked her to. The guy kept running when suddenly he saw something that made him stop and turn around. There was a handbag on the floor. It looks like it was his Han-mi's purse, so she was here and ran into this alley. The boy was looking at a large old building. It was an apartment building that looked pretty bad. The events were transferred to Kang Ji-hoon's memories. He stood on the threshold of the room. He looked at his apartment and thought to himself that he didn't understand when he started to hate the moment he opened the door and walked into his home. Kang Ji-hoon looked at a completely empty apartment. No one was there to greet him. The apartment was saturated with an atmosphere of emptiness and loneliness. It was this atmosphere of emptiness that made him feel empty inside. Kang Ji-hoon came in, dropped his briefcase, and wanted to go to his room. Suddenly, he saw money and a note on the table. It said, "To my beloved son." It looked like it was from his parents. Then the events moved to the game room. 2 boys sat at computers and played games. One of them was shouting slang phrases and leading the game. The room was dark, so it was late at night. Suddenly, Kang Ji-hoon leaned back in his gaming chair and said indignantly that they had played very poorly. Then he went to a mini-market that was open until night and bought something to eat. Kang Ji-hoon bought himself some ramen and a soda and ate it right in the store. The boy thought about how meaningless his days in the old 3rd grade school were. They seemed to last forever. Suddenly, Kang Ji-hoon saw someone walking through the window, carrying a briefcase and wearing a uniform. It was obviously from school. It turned out to be Han-mi. The girl noticed the guy through a shop window and was surprised to see him. Kang Ji-hoon was chewing when she saw him. Suddenly, she screamed and came closer to the glass to see Kang Ji-hoon. She was happy to see him. In fact, the guy was happy to see her too. She made his meaningless day brighter and added a little meaning to it. The couple returned home together in the meantime. Hong-mi said they had been seeing each other a lot lately. She also added that she had returned home at 9 p.m. every night after her preparatory courses, but had never seen Kang Ji-hoon here before. The girl talked a lot, and Kang Ji-hoon didn't have time to say a word. She asked what the boy was doing there, and then she said that they often had a 2-for-1 promotion. And then the girl added that if he waited for her, she would give him hers. Suddenly, Han-mi got very excited about something and screamed. The girl was very emotional, and that made her special. She was surprised that a small shop run by an old lady was still open. Han-mi stopped and said that usually the store closed by 7, as the goods were all sold out. Her mouth was about to water. She told me how good the tteokbokki made by the woman behind the glass were. Kang Ji-hoon then asked if Han-mi really loved this street food so much. A few minutes later, Han-mi had a whole plate of various delicacies in front of him, including tteokbokki. She immediately started eating it, stuffing her mouth full. Han-mi invited Kang Ji-hoon to try it too. because he was silently watching her eat, but he refused. The girl was so talkative that even when she was eating, she couldn't stop talking and talked a lot. She told Kang Ji-hoon that it would be nice to buy an ice cream, but only one. The guy saw that she was talking with her mouth full, jumped away and told her to chew it first, and then speak. He looked at her as if a little disgusted and said how much she ate, and she responded by offering him something to try again. Hanmi put the dish right in Kang Ji-hoon's mouth, and he shouted that he was talking at that moment. The girl apologized, but still asked why he ate so little. He replied that he had already eaten the noodles, and that was enough for him. At that, Hanmi laughed out loud. She saw Kang Ji-hoon's face, and something in it made her laugh hard. It turned out that the guy had ketchup on his cheek. She laughed at this and asked if she could take a picture of it. It was time for them to leave. The girl said she was very full, and when she left, she said she would buy them sweets next time. And in the end, she added that they would definitely meet again at school. Kang Ji-hoon stood and watched Hanmi leave, and he followed her with a look. In his mind, he wondered what she wanted to do next time. A new day had come. My classmates were sitting in math class. The teacher was solving something at the blackboard. Kang Ji-hoon sat at the back of the classroom and was sad. He was not solving or writing anything. He just propped his head up with his hand. He was not at all interested in what the teacher was talking about and what square root the equation would yield. His attention was drawn to something else. It turned out that the guy was looking at Hanmi all the time. It was obvious that she was not looking at the board either. Something was catching her attention. The girl was looking at the clock on the wall very carefully and with a kind of horror in her eyes, biting her nails. Kang Ji-hoon wondered what his girlfriend was looking at so intently. It turned out that she was watching the clock, and as soon as the big hand passed 5, the bell rang. Hanmi stood up abruptly and started to get ready. Meanwhile, the teacher told her that everything else had to be done at home. Then the girl abruptly opened the door and ran out into the hallway. She ran as fast as she could, not turning back. 2 guys were running behind her. She said that there were no chicken wings on the menu today. Kang Ji-hoon watched this performance as the teenagers fought in front of the cafeteria. He thought to himself that since then, he had been paying more and more attention to Hanmi at school. He looked at it all and said to himself how noisy they all were. The boy's face expressed dissatisfaction with what he was seeing, but inside, he wanted to look at Hanmi. The scene shifted back to Kang Ji-hoon's old company. They were discussing a friend's new purchase and its higher price. Some kind of motorcycle thing cost 1.5 million won. The guys made fun of their friend for paying such a price for it. The owner defended his purchase and said that this case protected against water and even radiation, but his friends joked that they thought the guy on the moped wanted to become a courier. The owner further defended himself and said that his trusted source had given the person the amount of money to do so, and that the boy had not realized the power of this investment. But the boys continued to joke and mock their friend. Meanwhile, Kang Ji-hoon sat alone and looked at the floor. He didn't seem to be interested in these conversations at all. My friend noticed this and approached the guy. He asked if Kang Ji-hoon had forgotten about today's case. He added that he had looked at someone's photos and they were very hot. The guy said without looking up that he didn't know if he would have gone because he didn't like crowds. His friend began to persuade him and said that he had already told them about him. Then, the 3 boys were walking somewhere between the crowds in an alley. Kang Ji-hoon walked behind, and his friends hugged each other in front. One of my friends told me that he had found a store where they could definitely sell them cigarettes. The friend replied that it was because he had a round face. The friends were laughing and discussing something. They were having a good time together and didn't notice Kang Ji-hoon walking lonely behind them. The guy didn't even look up. He was absolutely not interested in what his friends were talking about. His head was full of personal thoughts, when suddenly, something made his friends pay attention to Kang Ji-hoon. He suddenly said he was going to go home. When they turned around to look at the boy and start talking him down, he was already walking away and waving to his friends. It turned out that Kang Ji-hoon was supposed to treat them today, but he didn't go. His friends called him irresponsible. The boy rushed to the place where he had met Hanmi the last time. He wondered to himself if he would see her here again, or if he was just thinking about it too much. Kang Ji-hoon pulled out his phone to check the time and noticed that it was almost 9, and there was still no sign of Hanmi. Then, he decided to go to a mini-market. He confidently opened the door and greeted the cashier. Suddenly, he turned around sharply because he saw something. It made him pay attention. It turned out that it was Hanmi who was crouching down and picking out some sweets that she had promised. She also turned around to see Kang Ji-hoon. She got up and approached the boy. The girl started talking a lot again and asked if he wanted to see the promotion that the mini-market was offering. Suddenly, she pointed her finger at Kang Ji-hoon and asked what happened to him. She asked if the boy had run here because he was sweating profusely and was all wet. The boy's eyes grew bigger. He didn't want Hanmi to know. Kang Ji-hoon did his best to show that he hadn't run like that before Hanmi. So he said that he used to run all the time. He had to train. And then he added that he was very hungry to quickly change the subject. Hanmi realized this, but pretended to believe the guy and just smiled at him. And then she asked him if he liked toast. A few minutes later, the two of them were already eating 2 pieces of toast. The girl said they were very tasty, and Kang Ji-hoon said they were only a little bit, although you couldn't tell by the way he ate them. The guy looked at Hanmi. He couldn't get enough of her. Kang Ji-hoon thought about how good it felt to eat with someone at that moment. And not just anyone, but Lee Hong-mi. The girl stuffed her mouth full of the sandwich and smiled. The girl looked very cute in the guy's eyes. Then, Hanmi suddenly offered Ji-hoon some more pork toast. The boy joked that Hanmi was a pig. The girl replied that it was a special kind of pork toast. Kang Ji-hoon ate a lot that day. The teenagers had already left the mini-market and were eating ice cream. The girl asked why her classmate was behaving like that at school. Kang Ji-hoon did not understand. So the girl explained to him that the boy slept every day and she had never seen him talk to his classmates. She said that his friend said that he was just fighting for his life every day. Kang Ji-hoon looked up. He immediately asked who had said such things behind his back. But Hanmi said she didn't want to tell him that. The guy came home and looked at something on his cell phone. He had a smile on his face. Finally, he would come home and not feel empty inside. Suddenly he looked up and saw something very strange. There were scattered things on the floor. Broken dishes, photographs, and bottles of alcohol. His mother was sitting next to him. She asked him what time it was. Kang Ji-hoon saw his mother like that and immediately ran to her to find out what was wrong. My mom had her head down. She suddenly asked the boy why he had decided to quit school. She knew because his teacher had told her. Suddenly Kang Ji-hoon's eyes widened and his pupils narrowed. He didn't expect his mother to know about this. My mother was sitting on the floor. Her head was not supported on her neck, so it was down. She was wearing a big shirt. She did not look up and asked if it was true. Kang Ji-hoon started to make excuses and say that he didn't really mean it, but the guy couldn't finish. Something made him stop. Suddenly the boy's eyes went to his forehead. He was shocked by what he could see as he walked over to his mom faster. In her other hand, she had an open jar with some pills. The mother's hand was so weak that she couldn't hold it, so half of the container just spilled out onto the floor. Kang Ji-hoon ran up and started to collect all the pills. He yelled at his mom that she had promised not to take them anymore. They were hidden, but she found them anyway. Suddenly, the mother took her son by the face and began to say something incomprehensible. Then Kang Ji-hoon saw his mother's face, and this picture gave him goosebumps. Her eyes rolled up and saliva flowed from her open mouth. The woman said that everyone made her suffer, and then she said that it was like a knife stabbing Kang Ji-hoon in the heart. The grieving mother said that it was he who had brought her to this state. She also asked if the boy understood her. She added that Kang Ji-hoon was the only one who made her the person she was now in front of him. The boy's world just collapsed after those words. The birth mother imposed guilt on her son. Kang Ji-hoon will carry this pain for the rest of his life. A few hours later, the boy was already in the hospital emergency room waiting for his mother. He looked down and thought about everything that had happened. 2 doctors worked on her to pump out this so-called mother. Some kind of tube was inserted into her throat. The boy began to recall that the last time he saw his father, he told him to protect his mother at all costs. But since their divorce, his mother has been in the intensive care unit countless times. It was a common thing for the boy to see her in such a state. So, because of this, he would never forgive his father for abandoning them both, and now Kang Ji-hoon had to carry this burden with him. It was very hard for him because he was just a child. It was dark, and Kang Ji-hoon was returning home, walking his usual path with his head down. Suddenly, he looked up and saw something. Hanmi was standing in front of him, as if she was expecting a boy. Then she looked up and looked her friend in the face. She was standing under a streetlight holding some books in her hands, waiting for the guy to come up to her. Hanmi immediately asked where her classmate had been all this time. After all, she had been waiting for him for so long, but Kang Ji-hoon only responded by asking how the girl had gotten his address. And Hong-mi said she got it from her teacher. She attacked Kang Ji-hoon with questions about why he didn't go to school, and the teacher said that it was impossible to contact the boy. But Kang Ji-hoon did not even look at the girl and told her to leave. He added that he was not in the mood to talk to anyone. But before he could finish his sentence, The girl interrupted him. She grabbed her friend's hand and asked him to stop and not walk away from her. But the guy reacted abnormally. He pulled away abruptly and took his hand away, asking who Hanmi was anyway. The girl asked why Kang Ji-hoon was so angry. She said that he was not his usual self. But Kang Ji-hoon suddenly ridiculed the girl and said she was stupid. The girl's face changed dramatically. She didn't deserve to be treated like that. He looked down and asked what Lee Hong-mi even knew about him. And then he asked if she really thought they were friends. Kang Ji-hoon suddenly said that she wouldn't even have had the desire to look the guy in the eye if they weren't classmates. Suddenly, the guy turned to Hanmi, looked her in the eye, and told her to leave him alone and not to spoil his mood. In response, Hanmi told him that the guy had been very cruel to her. She added that she came here because of Kang Ji-hoon, because she was worried about her friend. He kept his eyes on her and thanked her for her concern. Then he told her to get behind him. The guy had already moved to the mat. Kang Ji-hoon saw Hanmi leave him. It was very painful for him because he was very happy to be with Hanmi. He was happy at such moments, but the guy was afraid to get closer to her. He had no choice but to run away from his feelings. Meanwhile, in reality, Kang Ji-hoon went inside the building and shouted the girl's name so that she would hear and come down to the boyfriend. Others joined him. The army opened fire, and Kang Ji-hoon lit a Molotov cocktail to clear the area. Then, hell broke loose. The room was very warm because there was an unrealistic amount of fire. Kang Ji-hoon kept calling out for the girl. The soldiers in front of us shouted for everyone to move back, and then more fire was launched. For moments, there was no air to breathe because of the smoke and stench coming from the burning corpses of the zombie monsters. Suddenly, Ji Han-hyun noticed something on the other side. One of the soldiers shouted about the exoskeleton. It seems that the man saw something in the midst of the fire. Then everyone turned back to the sound and saw the almost corpse of a soldier from this army on the floor. He was screaming that there was an exoskeleton inside. He fought a kind of unusual goiter monster which was nicknamed an exoskeleton. Everyone else was watching as the man desperately tried to fight the zombie monster. Suddenly, the soldier noticed something that was visible from the corner at the end of the corridor. Suddenly, he saw the paw of a zombie monster. It was approaching them, and for some reason was not afraid of fire at all. Ji Han-hyun's eyes widened sharply and his pupils narrowed. He realized that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, the whole zombie monster came out of the corner. It was crawling on the ground like an animal and looked like a skeleton with all the bones outlined. The monster got up and growled. It was definitely going to attack all these people. We had to react quickly to survive. It was a huge zombie monster, 3 meters high. It was bigger than people. There were some spikes on its back. Even army soldiers with firearms were afraid of this monster. Their faces showed fear and stupor through their masks. A huge zombie monster stood over the corpse of a soldier and roared. Suddenly, one of the soldiers shouted So-yeon's name. It was probably the name of an innocent man who was about to be eaten by a monster. The man picked up an assault rifle and started shooting at the monster. By doing so, he only angered the zombie monster, but it didn't seem to care about bullets and gunfire. Then the ugly giant threw out its healthy tentacles to attack. In a matter of seconds, the monster attacked the soldier. He did not even have time to react. He growled at the man, but he was looking straight at his victim. Other soldiers saw what was happening and were in a stupor. They all did not know what to do. Suddenly, the zombie monster roared very loudly and opened its mouth completely. Its mouth was huge and had many teeth. The zombie monster looked very frightening. Then, the other soldiers from the army turned to Mr. Park and told him that they had to leave immediately before this monster ate them all. But Mr. said they had to ask for reinforcements first. Ji Han-hyun saw this and realized that he had to run away immediately. Someone shouted that they all had to run the other way now. Meanwhile, a huge zombie monster began to eat its victim. Suddenly, he noticed that the others started to run away. He could not let it go and let his victims escape. Ji Han-hyun was the last one to escape, so he noticed it and realized what was about to happen. He said they should have left the building as soon as possible. Suddenly, another monster began to run after them, this time a different one. It growled, making itself known. Then one of the soldiers fired at him to burn the creature alive. Suddenly, the man noticed that their fire was over, so they were all in danger now. The soldier told the sir that they were all out of fuel and in danger, but Kang Ji-hoon had a Molotov cocktail that was on fire. Suddenly, the soldiers screamed that a zombie monster had come down the stairs and had just eaten their friend. It seemed to be chasing them all. Mr. realized that they all had to leave the room immediately. He came closer to the monster and started shooting at it, but it seems that the big zombie monster didn't care about that. So he just ran to attack the man and everyone else. Mr. Parker turned to the others and told them to run away, while the man would distract the zombie monster as far away from them as possible. The soldier realized that they would all die, so one of them had to sacrifice himself. The others, without hesitation, immediately began to run away as fast as they could. The soldier with the fire ran in the other direction, so the giant zombie monster ran after him so the others could escape and find shelter. The company noticed that there was a free space ahead of them, so they could run into this wing of the residential building and escape until reinforcements arrived. 4 guys, 2 of whom were soldiers from the army, and Kang Ji-hoon and Jihan Hyun. They went into a room and closed the door behind them. The soldier immediately picked up the radio and contacted the base. He said that it was the 3rd squad. Meanwhile, the team of Kang Ji-hoon and Jihan Hyun laughed out loud at such adventures. Suddenly, the man asked the military what had just happened. The soldier looked at Jihan Hyun and remained silent, making it clear that he was waiting for the question to continue with details. The man shook his head and spoke with pauses. But eventually he formulated a question and asked how the army knew about this monster. But this question angered the military officer. He asked if Jihan Hyun had really asked the troops, whose goal was to exterminate such monsters and the virus, about the zombie monster. He said with irritation that he didn't understand what Jihan Hyun was trying to say. The man explained that he had seen many monsters himself, but he had never seen anything like this. And he hadn't even seen people who could see such a zombie monster. It was some new species they had never seen before. He asked what, as a soldier, the man should have known about this monster. While Jihan Hyun was talking, the soldier began to undress. It seemed that the suit was not very comfortable. The soldier began to explain that when a normal mutant tends to soften their body, they then cover the exoskeleton with enlarged bones. Meanwhile, the man had already taken the backpack with fuel off his shoulders and put it on the floor. He continued that it was difficult to deal with them because the virus cell had already penetrated the bones, and it was almost impossible to burn them with fire, only to set them on fire for a few seconds, but no more. The soldier added that they had also run out of fuel. All the men looked down at the backpack, which was completely empty. Jihan Hyun took his face mask off and asked if the zombie monsters could mutate into other shapes and species besides the exoskeleton they had just seen. The soldier answered the man's question positively. He said that there were also zombie monsters that could merge with other corpses and turn into one big monster. Therefore, the man added that the army always tried to burn infected corpses so that zombie monsters that did not burn could not merge with them. Kang Ji-hoon suddenly took off his mask and asked the man why they hadn't told them anything about it before. Even though the military knew everything, the guy was angry and even furious. He said that if they had been told earlier, Kang Ji-hoon would never have come here. The boy started clenching his hand into a fist in anger. He added that his friends would never have been like this then. The guy's face suddenly became very angry. He looked at the soldier and sincerely blamed him for all this. The uniformed man looked at him and did not understand why Kang Ji-hoon was so angry with him, but he did not respond to these provocations. Suddenly, someone interrupted their conversation. Someone addressed this gentleman. It was another soldier who said that he had been informed that reinforcements were about to arrive, and they had already been sent. The man said that this was great news, and added that they would all wait here until someone came to rescue them. Kang Ji-hoon still could not calm down. He looked at the man and his face was very dissatisfied and angry. Then, he suddenly asked to have something explained to him. In all this conversation, the boy did not understand only one thing. The soldier looked at the boy to hear his question. Kang Ji-hoon then looked the man in the eye and asked what would happen to his friends. After all, the team never found them. The soldier told him in all seriousness that it would be better to surrender because it was simply impossible. The man hinted that the girls had probably already been eaten by the exoskeleton monster. Kang Ji-hoon was furious when he heard this answer. He was about to explode. Suddenly, the phone rang in the room. It was a very old-style phone that worked by light. Its sound interrupted a quarrel that was about to break out. All the boys turned to the sound of the phone. They did not expect anyone to call them. Their faces showed great surprise. They even froze a bit, and no one dared to be the first to come up and pick up the phone. But still, the soldier came over and decided to pick up the phone. Perhaps it was something important. On the other end of the phone, someone first coughed loudly and then stammered out a greeting. The voice sounded quite old and sickly. It turned out that he was a rather old man who was already sick and lying down. He asked if the boys had just gone into the next room. The old man apologized and said that he had accidentally overheard their conversation. Suddenly, the old man said something that made Jihan Hyun's eyes widen and his eyebrows rise. The old man asked if the team was looking for a group of girls. The man could not believe his ears and what he had just heard. So he asked the old man again what he had just said. Meanwhile, in the shelter where the rest of the teenagers and the homeless were staying, a man in military print pants was already completely covered in frog egg virus blisters. The teenagers made their own homemade wicks and were already pouring oil on them to set them on fire. Yeon-woo held the wick, Kangmin poured oil on it, and Isuri set the whole structure on fire. Jeon-woo waited until all the participants said that everything was ready and the wick was lit. Then, he dropped what he was throwing. The guy swung and aimed straight at the homeless man, who had almost completed his transformation into a zombie monster. Jeon-woo hit the target, and the homeless man caught fire and screamed in pain. Then all the other teenagers ran up. Ham Seong-yu and Seo-young were holding fire extinguishers. From behind, someone shouted for the boy to be ready and put out the fire before it could spread. Ham Seong-yu said he would do so, but asked the commander to calm down. Even in such an important and stressful situation, he did not tolerate orders. So-yeon asked if the homeless man was already dead to know if he could be watered, to which Ham Seong-yu irritably replied that he didn't know, so he just started watering the corpse. Seo-young followed suit, and also pulled the handle of the fire extinguisher. Suddenly, Yeon-woo's attention shifted to something else. After that, his arm suddenly hurt again. Jeon-woo was afraid of another attack. Then his classmates would definitely think he was infected. The boy saw a door that did not give him peace. He realized that the cause of his pain was hidden behind that blue door. Jeon-woo went to them and opened the handle to see what was inside the door. Suddenly, he realized that this pain he was feeling was different from the previous one. When he opened the door, he could not believe his eyes. The entire room was covered with white slime from the frog egg virus. He immediately decided to go inside with a lighted homemade torch and check why the pain was so different. Kang-min followed Yeon-woo into the room. Another homeless man could be seen lying on the floor among a pile of white frog egg slime. It looked like he was the one who had spread the virus. The boys suddenly heard someone crying. They looked at the painting and were so frightened that they had shivers down their spines. Another homeless man sat in the corner of the room. His body seemed to be fused to the wall, only the man's head was not covered with white mucus. Everything looked very creepy. The homeless man suddenly asked the teenagers to help him right away. The man could barely speak. Every word was very difficult for him. Suddenly, he said something that gave the boys goosebumps again. The homeless man asked that the teenagers kill him right now so that he would not suffer and would not be able to infect other people in the room. Suddenly, Ham Seong-yu ran up to them and immediately took a torch and ran to set the man on fire, fulfilling his dying wish. The guy had already taken a swing and was about to throw a wick and fire at the zombie monster. Suddenly, Yeon-woo stopped his classmate Ham Seong-yu and asked him not to light the homeless man. The boy was surprised by Jeon-woo's desire, but he did not contradict him and did not set the man on fire. Jeon-woo didn't even look in his direction. He told everyone to wait. The guy came a little closer and noticed that the man had no cells. It was a fused form of the virus. But Yeon-woo was very surprised by the fact that the homeless man could speak, even though his body was completely covered with virus cells and the transformation process had started. Ham Seong-yu was standing behind him, shouting for Yeon-woo to kill this zombie monster as soon as possible. But the guy instead just started walking and approaching the zombie monster. He was still homeless and could talk. So maybe Yeon-woo could get some answers to his nagging questions. Suddenly, the man roared out in a very terrible way. It was a cry of pain. The homeless man was in incredible pain because of the transformation. Suddenly, Yeon-woo felt a pain in his arm at the same time as the homeless man's scream. The guy was now sure that the pain in his arm was the same as the pain of facing a zombie monster. Jeon-woo began his interrogation. He asked the homeless man if he had heard the boy. If so, he asked the man to answer some of his questions. Jeon-woo immediately said that he had a fire, so I had to respond without joking. It was a rather strange threat, given the fact that the homeless man was begging to be burned. Suddenly, the man looked at the boy very strangely, as if he recognized him. The homeless man asked if Jeon-woo was the first to enter the room. The man seemed to sense him and called him over. Meanwhile, Ham Seong-yu yelled at Yeon-woo not to talk to the homeless man and just burn him, calling his classmate various curse words. But Jeon-woo did not pay attention. He had to find out the answers to his questions. Suddenly, the homeless man screamed in fear and asked Jeon-woo to just kill him with fire so that the man would not feel this pain. The guy immediately began to calm him down and promised to help the homeless man. But first, he had to answer a few questions. Jeon-woo asked why the man was conscious, even though his body was infected. This question surprised the man. He laughed and looked at Jonah. Suddenly, the homeless man understood. He looked Yeon-woo in the eye and told him that the boy was also infected. The boy was surprised to hear this. The classmates behind him were also horrified and afraid. The homeless man said he could feel the virus in Jeon-woo's body, just like the boy felt the frog egg virus in the bodies of others. He yelled at Jeon-woo for still having a normal body. The homeless man didn't understand it. Why Jeon-woo hadn't turned into a zombie monster yet. The guy started to defend himself and told the homeless man not to joke with him like that because Jeon-woo was not infected. He repeated his question and asked the man to answer it. The homeless man began to explain, incomprehensibly, that there was a tumor in his head. The virus didn't like that, so his head was not infected with frog egg cells, and that's why the man was still conscious and able to speak. The homeless man said he had already answered the question and shouted once again for Jeon-woo to burn him. Jeon-woo was starting to get a little nervous. He said he would definitely help the man, but he had to answer a question. Yeon-woo asked if the homeless man meant that his brain was not infected because there was a tumor. Then he added a question about how the man had found out. This question even annoyed the man a bit. He said that the virus still kept talking to him, so that's how the homeless man found out about everything. Suddenly, he looked at the already frightened Yeonwoo again and said that the boy had heard that voice too. It was supposed to be a question, but it sounded more like a statement. Then Yeonwoo really started to hear his own voice in his head, but no one else's. He thought that maybe the homeless man was talking about the pain in his arm. Jeon-woo did not voice his thoughts. Suddenly, the homeless man laughed and said that Jeon-woo had understood everything correctly, as if the man had read his mind. The homeless man added out loud that Yeon-woo had obviously heard the voices as well. Then the guy looked at his arm and thought about whether the pain in his limb could be caused by the interaction between viruses. Isuri stood behind the boy. She trusted him, but as the zombie monster said all this, she began to doubt her classmate and feel deceived. Meanwhile, the homeless man began to say that he did not know how Jeon-woo managed to stop the transformation. And then, the man added that inside his body, the virus was still growing and spreading. Jeon-woo became increasingly nervous because he could not feel the virus cells spreading or growing in his body. The homeless man, meanwhile, said he could feel it inside the boy's body. It was unclear whether it was the man or the virus that was communicating with him. Suddenly, the man started talking about how Yeon-woo would become like him. His voice became that of a madman. The man's head fell to the floor. The homeless man added that Yeon-woo would be sure to eat when he transformed. Suddenly, the homeless man said something that gave Jeon-woo goosebumps again. He said that the boy would eat all his friends. Suddenly, aggression took over the guy's emotions. He shouted at the homeless man that he was talking nonsense and added that he should get out. The homeless man raised his head and looked at Yeon-woo. He laughed at him and asked if he wanted to bet with him. Suddenly, the man just screamed that Yeon-woo would not be able to avoid the merger. It was as if the virus inside the man was already speaking. It was as if he was threatening Jeon-woo. The homeless man said that the virus didn't like it when it couldn't infect the whole body. And in Jeon-woo's case, the virus could not infect the guy at all. Yeon-woo's eyes widened at what the homeless man was saying, and he was already confused. The last straw was when the man said that in the end, Yeon-woo would eat all his friends. The homeless man wanted to continue threatening the boy, but he was unable to finish. Yeon-woo shouted at the homeless man to shut up and stop talking nonsense to him. Then, in his emotions, the guy waved a torch and threw fire at the man, burning him alive. Suddenly, the homeless man's body quickly caught fire and burst into flames. The man did not threaten Yeon-woo anymore and did not say these nonsense things. The guy started to loudly shake his head. He had experienced a lot of stress in those few minutes. His heart was beating frantically. Suddenly, he realized that he was being watched. He turned to look at his classmates. Meanwhile, while the boy was talking to the homeless zombie monster, all his classmates came into the room and watched and observed what the homeless man was saying.